I'm Ann Petrick, Vice President of Research at Vistage, and I'm happy to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series. This series is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community. Experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices to help you navigate new challenges and possibilities. Each year in our Q4 Vistage CEO Confidence Index survey, we capture the top decisions, investments, and challenges of our members to understand what is top of mind for CEOs coming into the new year. In our analysis, we distilled the data from over 1,400 CEOs into 3 key themes that we delved into in our CEO Projections 2023 report, which was released just a few weeks ago. Today, Vistage Chief Research Officer is here to share those themes and guidance from experts on how to navigate them. Joe Galvin is a respected thought leader that has presented and published all over the world for Vistage, as well as in his role as Chief Research Officer for CSO Insights and an analyst for Serious Decisions and Gartner. Please join me in welcoming Joe Galvin. Over to you.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you to everyone listening in today. I really appreciate your time. I am Joe Galvin. I'm the Chief Research Officer for Vistage. As always, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter, as I post content specific to the issues, topics, and decisions our community of CEOs identify as most important to them. You can find today's, you can download the report by simply going to vistage.com/research center. I'm going to reference a lot of content as well today, all of which is available and easy to find on the Research Center. So with your permission, let me begin. Suddenly, without warning, at 5:24 a.m., San Francisco in 1906 was hit with a massive earthquake. Once the aftershocks had passed and the fires had burned out, they were left with the aftermath. Initially, it was hard to survive, let alone to function. But by 1915, San Francisco was largely rebuilt with broader avenues, more space, and improved infrastructure. Suddenly, without warning, in March of 2020, COVID hit. And like an economic seismograph, the Vistage CEO Confidence Index captured that impact on the result on not just our confidence, but also on GDP. And in the aftermath that we're now in, it's interesting because it seems as if everything has changed, but nothing's really different. Everything has changed in the sense that we're in an entirely different economy. The decade of the 2010s saw a period of no inflation, no interest rates, 0 to no interest rates, and at least for the first half, relatively ease in hiring people. But now that's all changed. We see inflation's coming down again, but it's still well above where it was and will settle at a level well above where it was. Interest rates too are continuing to climb. And unemployment at 3.5% means we're still involved in this competition for talent. So the economy is radically different. The workforce has changed. I think we all went through some, self-introspection about our personal priorities and purpose as a result of the pandemic. And that generated some behavioral change. We also have a broader generational influence now. Our millennials are now the largest component of the workforce. And all of a sudden, these pesky little Gen Z folks are showing up with a different set of values and ideas. And of course, flexibility is the new black. Flexibility for essential workers, work from home for knowledge workers. The workforce has changed. And as a result, the workplace has changed. The hybrid workplace has become the de facto standard. And although there's the tug of war remains between coming back or staying out, there's no question the hybrid workplace is here to stay. And that workplace is driven by the digital environment that technology provides. And it provides, or it capitalizes on, collaboration and is dependent upon collaboration to be successful in the new workplace. And of course, the customer has changed. We found that, and we'll talk about this more later, but we found that the pandemic changed behavior, inflation's changed behavior. And I'm willing to bet the people who buy what you provide, as well as the people who sell what you provide, you've probably seen some change there as well. So it seems as if everything has changed, but nothing is really different. Fiscal discipline remains critical. Those hard-earned lessons from the pandemic continue to live with us. The importance of cash flow, access to capital, being able to manage expenses closely without cutting off the business. Fiscal discipline remains critical. Operational execution, the ability to operate at full capacity. As organizations tried to instantly scale as we came out of the pandemic, and now as we're facing a slowdown, how do you manage this ability to operate at full capacity? That's a function of having people who are skilled and motivated to perform in a high performance workplace. Workforce competition. We saw from, call it about 2015, 2016, we saw the war for talent escalate. Now it's gone off the charts. Quit rates are at all-time highs. And pay raises, well, that's across the board, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And in all economies, good, bad, or neutral, getting closer to your customers is always the right answer. But we have to recognize that everyone is in the aftermath. Your customers are in the aftermath, dealing with the same crazy economic environment that none of us have dealt with, worrying about the same issues that they are. So understand that getting close to your customers, A, is always the right answer, but specifically now in the uncertainty of the aftermath economy, it becomes even more critical. And where that takes us to is the aftermath economy. In order to get a concept around this, we first spoke to our good friend, Dr. Alan Bolio from ITR Economics back in January. And he shared with us a long-term view, both for the current year and future years, about what that means. We further confirmed that with our good friend, Connor Lokar. Many of you have seen him at your local Vistage executive summits. We have Connor featured in our report, and he had three key messages about the economy. One, that the onset of the recession probably won't happen until the end of 23 and into 24. That 24 is the worst relative to 23. But then, and this is important, a clear path for growth in 25 to 28. That means that we have this period of the aftermath economy while the aftershocks play their way through the economic system. And then we set a path for growth for a period from 25 to 28. And we'll talk about what happens by that afterwards. So with that as a backdrop for the economy, we created the CEO Projections 2023. Every year we go through an analysis of the decisions, investments, and challenges faced by our members. And from that, we extract a set of themes or concepts. And this year, there were three very clear themes that came out. One is this concept of workforce velocity. Workers, the people that work for you and the people that you're trying to recruit, have never had more power than they have now. Their ability to find jobs through all the job posting sites, that transparency is greater than ever, as well as their ability to promote themselves and their skills on LinkedIn. This level of transparency has never been available before. And with the number of jobs, and now just under 10 million, still above the other rates, and we see more and more people looking to change or looking to stay. This concept of velocity, the ability for workers to move, to find an opportunity that pays more, better working conditions, or adapts better to how they want to live, has become a real theme. Next is the infrastructure for execution. We're in this new modality of the hybrid workforce, and how do we power up our essential workers? And how do you create an infrastructure for that that's going to allow your organization to thrive in the digital workplace? And then, of course, where do you find opportunity in the aftermath? For some of our members, it's been a question that they saw massive growth over the last year and a half coming out of the pandemic, and now they're struggling to absorb that and be able to function. For others, they're continuing to grow, and it's how do they manage that growth and continue to sustain that growth? And for others, they're struggling to find growth. And so we identified some areas that create opportunity in the aftermath as we transition into that next growth cycle. Okay? That's why it's so hard to be a CEO. There are so many decisions that we're facing that no one's faced before. We haven't seen runaway inflation like this since the 70s and 80s. We haven't seen interest rates like this for at least 15 years. And the war for talent and the competition for talent is greater than ever. And that's why we think that CEOs are in the business of making decisions. And these are hard decisions. We think about decision-making in our framework of optimized decision-making that says decisions are always a function of importance and complexity. Meaning the more important, the more complex, and usually the more expensive a decision is, the more effort we put into it. For basic decisions, and you've probably made a dozen of these already today, we can rely on our instincts. We can read and react and go. But as things get more complicated, we lean on our judgment, which is our experience, our training, our knowledge, our situational and contextual fluency to make that decision. And then when things are really tough, really hard, and really expensive, we rely on the perspectives, the external resources and people that we trust and respect. And that's where we hope Vistage fits in, Vistage Research. We aspire to be your most trusted resource for research, data, and expert perspectives on the issues and topics that you tell us are most important. We use our decision model as a framework to think about decisions. Optimized decision is our concept around decision making, but the decision model focuses on the decisions that you have to make as a leader. It starts with you at the core. How do you show up every day as a leader? What are the attributes, behaviors, and competencies of being a leader? Next is leadership. What are the processes, the tactics, the strategies, the techniques of leading? And then what are the elements of the business that you're trying to drive, whether that's customers, talent, financials, and operations? We created this model with the input of over 200 Vistage chairs going to 14 cities to get a rationalization around what are the common terms to use this. And we use this as a foundation for everything that we do. We get our information, our data from our Vistage CEO Confidence Index. We just released yesterday the Q1 results. I invite you to go to the Research Center and download this. But this also becomes an important source of information for us because not only for our confidence index, but also for the research, and you'll see some of those questions in our presentation today that comes out of that survey. So I invite you, if you haven't participated, to please participate. And for those of you that do participate, thank you so much. It's so important. We want to make sure we're focused entirely on what you tell us is most important. So with that as a backdrop, let's get into projections 2023. Let's start with a look at the decisions, investments, and challenges that you told us were most important. What are the major decisions? What are the major decisions you'll have to make regarding your business in 2023? How would you have answered this in December, and has that changed since? Well, our data shows that hiring, recruiting, and sourcing is the top decision. And that's been the top decision in the 6 years that we've done this. But you notice performance management HR is right behind. This focus on talent and workforce velocity is real. If we move on, and this has been pretty consistent over time, if we move on to major investments, what are the major investments you're planning to make for your business in 2023? And we see hiring, recruiting, and sourcing at the top of the list. Now, what's interesting is that 2 years ago, and for the 4 years prior, technology was always the top investment. But last year, and now this year again, we see hiring, recruiting is more important than technology. And again, that's reflective of this focus on workforce velocity and the challenges of hiring and the importance of people in keeping your business running, followed by technology. And last is leadership challenges. What is the most significant leadership challenge you're facing right now? And this is an open-ended question, which is always interesting because we go through all the responses and we get single word responses and we get full paragraphs. But it begins to paint a very real picture of what are the challenges that our community are facing. And again, consistent with the other data, it's talent, hiring, retention, development, leadership development. The focus on talent and the importance of talent is as important today as it's ever been. Next is financial management. As we decelerate into this slowdown, as we downshift into this slowdown, it's about understanding the uncertainty and when will this stabilize and create a path for growth. Will there be a recession? Will there not be a recession? Will it be deep? Will it be long? Even still, we need to prepare for it. Plan for the worst, and hope for the best. Inflation continue to be a problem. Cash flow, all those financial management challenges we faced during the pandemic remain critical to our leaders. And then growth. Where do you find growth? How do you manage growth? For some, it's declining demand. For others, it's changing customers. For others, how do I manage the growth that I've absorbed? These challenges really set up our 3 themes that we're focused on. And let's peel those back a little bit now. We're going to start with workforce velocity. Quit rates is really become the most important data point for people to track. This is data, and we look at it every month. This looks at the quit rates. These are people that quit the business. They leave because they want to leave. There's a lot of ways, we'll talk about data in a minute, but I think quit rates really become the de facto standard for workforce velocity. People quit to take a job. Few people quit to leave the workforce. Some boomers are aging out and they're being replaced by the Zs that are coming in. But by and large, people quit to go to another job. And we see in February, the most recent data, that 4.1 million people quit their jobs. And most of them moved on to another job, a better paying job, a job that maybe has got a more flexible work option or allows for greater flexibility to work from home or to work remote. People can find that because there are more jobs than there are people looking for jobs. We still see 60% of our communities increasing headcount in the year ahead. What's interesting, if you look back to February 2019, right? We had no idea the pandemic was coming. We were at the peak of what was then the talent wars. 3.5 million people had quit their jobs. We're still 600,000 above that. You can see the peak went above 4.4 million just about 5-6 months ago. But if you look back to 2012, as we came out of the Great Recession, when so many people lost their jobs, only 2.1, so 2 million more. Well, if you lost your job as a result of in 2008 or 09, you might have been out of work for 6, 12, 18 months and come in at two levels lower than where you left. Now, workers have the power, and that's why quit rates are so important. This is a chart from our good friend, Mark Emmer, that he pulled together for us, and it looks at how quit rates are up. Quit rates become the true metric of involuntary turnover, meaning people that leave your organization that you do want to leave, that you don't want to leave. And if you think about maybe you've lost an important employee over the last 6, 12 months, you know how much that hurts. You know, in a big company, it's, you know, next man up and they've got the resources to backfill. But in small and mid-sized businesses, when you lose a key worker at any level, it really hurts the business. And what we've learned is it's going to take longer, it's going to cost more to hire someone with less experience, less training, and less capabilities. That's the reality of workforce velocity today. Why? Well, you know, it's been called the Great Resignation. I think of it as a big upgrade, right? Who doesn't want an upgrade? A better job with better pay, better aligned with how you want to work, better aligned with where your career wants to go. Well, we know that 7.3% of the folks who stayed saw an increase. They saw an increase of 7.3%. But look at this. Those that changed jobs, and this is data from ADP, changed jobs saw a 15.2% increase. So there's no reason not to understand why folks are either looking for, or when the phone rings, they answer it, because there's opportunity. There's opportunity for them because there are more jobs than people looking for jobs to find a better job. Consequently, you have to create a job and a role and environment that they want to be a part of, right? This is our concept of workforce velocity. It's how do you measure the speed of change, the speed of your workforce? So we asked this question about what are the people metrics that you're measuring for your business? And we found a variety of metrics: retention, attrition, turnover, engagement. Really interesting to see how people are looking at this, but we're going to focus in on quit rates. And we're going to ask this question in our June survey: what are your quit rates for 2022? Trying to get a handle on what those quit rates look like for the Vistage community, but also for the different vertical markets and regions, because I think that's a really important note. Annual quits are the number of quits during the entire year as a percent of annual average employment. Basically, who was working for you on January 1? And of those people, how many are still working there at 12/31? That's quit rates. People that leave the business you don't want to leave. And that becomes really the de facto metric for understanding velocity. It's been hard to hire. And if you've been trying to hire a year ago, you knew what we mean. Well, that's starting to get easier. Is your company finding it easier or more difficult to fill jobs as a result since the start of the year? And you can see Q3 to Q4, we saw a substantial shift. Now, 28% are saying it's easier than it was. It's still hard, but it's easier. And I think this is consistent with the slowing, the decelerating, the downshifting of the economy, as that pressure to fill jobs and the desire to increase headcount is tempered. But I would caution you that this is only a lull, that once the economy gets settled and stabilized and begins to grow, the demand for talent will accelerate. And it will accelerate to a level beyond which we've recently experienced. So don't get fooled into thinking that things are going to go back to where they were. It's going to get easier. No, I think over the next 12 months, it may remain where it is. But I assure you, as we get in through 24 into 25, competition for talent is going to accelerate radically. You know, it's hiring that gets the headlines, right? If hiring has become more difficult, what are you doing in response? And we've been tracking this for the last 18 months. This is data from Q4. But it's not surprising that boosting wages, 84% have done that, and anybody who has it is starting to. But look at what's next: developing the existing workforce and leadership development. They're also two of the largest areas that people are planning to implement. Why? Because investing, well, we'll talk about this in a minute. Investing in your workforce has benefits, and investing in your leaders is critical. You know, it's often said that people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. Consequently, if you're not investing in your bosses, then you're not investing in your workforce, and they're at risk. To help you with this, we published a report, Employee Development, a couple of years ago, that looks at the reason you do it is to improve performance. Give people the skills, give them the knowledge, cross-train them. So if you do lose something, they can step over. Prepare them for the next role, and develop them on a more personal, human level. Some of the wellness, some of the other elements like that are really important. Two, it drives retention. If people see that you're investing in them and investing in their career, well, that's important to retention. And it also becomes your competitive advantage in hiring. One, if I'm considering leaving and comparing it to an offer from someone else, employee development is one of those areas I can compare and contrast. By the same token, if I'm looking to join your company, what is your development program? What are you doing to help me become better, to help me invest in my career? There's an old adage of, what if we train, the CFO says, what if we train them and we leave? And the CEO says, what if we don't train them and they stay? It's that same conundrum we've been in. Investing in employees pays off in a multitude of ways. And that's why we see so many folks focused on employee development and bringing better programs into their workforce. Right? It's also about leadership development. Do you invest specifically for your company's managers and leaders? And you can see from Q1 of last year to Q4, we saw a growth of 5%, already at 75%. Now, 80% of folks are investing in leaders and managers. If you're one of the 20% that haven't, I would strongly suggest you take a look at it. And for those of you that are involved in it, double down on that strategy, because there is no one more important in your organization. There's no one more important to a worker, to me as an employee, than the person I work for. They control everything. They set my standards. They define my activities. They measure the goals. They control my career politically. Consequently, ensuring that your managers are well-positioned and well-trained is critical to retaining employees. I would also comment that with all the change we saw as a result of the pandemic, no one's job changed more than the boss, the person who's managing people. Why? Because they've gone from an environment, especially for knowledge workers, where they could go around and see them every day in the office. Now, the ability to manage remote employees and to create and extend the culture and the community is challenging. And none of these managers have done it before. That's why it's so important to give them the training and development they need to be successful and to drive success in the folks that work for them. To support this, last spring, we dropped our research report called Building a Better Boss. It's looking at the importance of the boss, the skills required, but most importantly, what are the areas to focus on? And we had some outstanding experts. Legendary Vistage chair and speaker Greg Buston talked about truth and accountability. Really important topic. Our good friend Maggie Graziano talked about the culture that you need to create. And Dr. Gleb Spersky, one of our great friends, he talks about some of the bias, and specifically this proximity bias that says, as a boss, I'm more inclined to look favorable on people I see versus people I don't. And I can tell you, as someone who has worked remote for the last 12 years, it's a new skill set to make sure you're engaged and connected. So I invite you again to download this report if you'd like to learn more at the Vistage Research Center. Right? The reality is people quit, right? The hiring is challenging, but the reality is that people quit. We asked this question: have your employee retention rates changed since the beginning of the year? How you choose to measure retention, but have your retention rates changed since the beginning of the year? And what you can see from Q1 of last year at the bottom to Q4 at the top, we're seeing it's improving, specifically from Q3 to Q4 as this deceleration began. And you can see that retention rates are improving, and that's good. But again, I would suggest to you that while we move through the aftermath, it will stay in this range. But once we begin to accelerate into the next growth cycle, you'll see people looking to take advantage of that as they can find a higher paying job that advances their career and aligns with their work style desires, right? So we asked this question because it's important to understand: what improvements have you made to increase employee retention in the last 12 months? Well, it's not surprising that adjusting base comp, we saw that earlier. That's important to do. But look at the next two. In the yellow is planning to improve. And these are the two highest: leadership development and workforce development. Both concepts we talked about before when it comes to hiring, but now it's so critical when you talk about retaining your employees. We're in the process right now of a research report, Workforce Velocity, the key strategies and trends for retention. We'll be releasing that in early May. What we found that there were 4 key themes, if you will, that came out of this. One is, of course, to provide competitive compensation. And we published in November, again, with our friend Mark Emmer, the state of employment and wages that talks about compensation and how that aligns and compares. Invest in workforce development. And we talked before about employee development and leadership development. Define, model, and reinforce culture. We published our Creating a Conscious Culture. Our theme was create the culture you want, or you'll get the culture you deserve. Culture is so powerful. And it's powerful because as a leader, you espouse the culture and hopefully you live the culture. But what makes my culture as a worker happen is my boss. So what have you done to ensure the people, the bosses who manage the people that do the work, are pulling that culture through? Or are your local managers creating a local culture and their own local little fiefdom? This is why culture becomes so important and why your leaders are so important to pull that through to the workforce. And then understand and drive engagement. This is a topic for another day. And as I said, we'll be publishing this report in early May. We're just wrapping it up. And I think you'll find some really great insights when you think about how you want to improve retention. And most importantly, how that will position you as we move out of the aftermath economy and into the next growth cycle. That takes us to our next topic, which is the infrastructure for execution. Right? What do we mean by that? Well, a couple things. One, it starts with digital transformation. We ask this question, we've asked it periodically, but it's really interesting because, what best describes your current workforce model? And what we see is that for knowledge workers, those folks who work with information and data, for those that can, we went to the hybrid because we had to very quickly as COVID shut us down in April of 2020, right? 11% are all remote. Now, we had asked a question, not specific to this, but before the pandemic, it was only like 3 or 4%. So we've seen this massive shift to remote or to hybrid work. Obviously, people that have to be on site, essential, have to be on site. If you're a lab technician, if you're in construction, if you're in manufacturing, so many of these jobs, you have to be on site. That's just how it is, right? But what can you do to make that better? But what's really fascinating to me about this, and when you peel it back, is what's made this possible is digital transformation. If COVID had hit 15 years before, circa 2005, business might have collapsed. Why? Because, there we go, we didn't have the mobility. 15 years ago, everybody were on hardwired desktops. You would go into the office and all the information resided inside a tower that was connected inside the environment. Now everyone's on laptops, which gives mobility, the ability to work from anywhere. We saw radical improvements in connectivity as we move from being hardwired to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi rates are blazing. 5G makes it possible to be anywhere and get connected. So connectivity has radically improved. And then we've moved from chat to collaboration. This is how we connect. The key to success in the hybrid environment is our ability to collaborate. Well, I would say in any environment, collaboration is so important. It what makes teams work. It what makes programs work. It's what makes companies work. And that's why collaboration and these new collaboration apps, whether you're using Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever, they are all tools that makes it easier for this dispersed, mobile, remote, hybrid workforce to get their jobs done and to work together. It's the infrastructure to execute. And we ask, are you investing in technology to reduce the labor burden of your product or service? Well, yes, 75% are. Well, that's not a surprise. It just confirms what many of us know. Right? One of those areas of technology is AI and ChatGPT. ChatGPT is getting a lot of attention since it was released publicly to everyone in November. It's been a lot of fun. I don't know if you played with it. I have. It's a lot of fun. We heard from our chairs at our Chair World event in January that ChatGPT and specifically AI was a big topic. So we quickly gathered some of our experts to have a conversation on this. And we'll be doing another one of these in the very near future, as we want to stay ahead of this and stay on this. We also did, in the fall of 2018, in association with Salesforce, we published a report on our AI for small and mid-sized businesses. And it was really interesting because what we wanted to do is, one, we wanted to understand what are the concepts of AI. We wanted to find real-world cases and then had some recommendations. We'll be dusting this off, updating it, and asking those same questions. I'm really interested to see how our community has moved. We had a conversation with a Vistage member who's on the leading edge of this. And he made a brilliant comment. He said that ChatGPT it is as bad as it will be. It is the worst it will be today. It will only get better. It will only get smarter. Artificial intelligence, we interact with it in so many ways we don't realize. But now AI, ChatGPT, which is a function of AI, and these other capabilities are coming very quickly. Consequently, it's critical for your infrastructure to understand how AI can help support your people. A lot of folks might think, hey, I can use AI to replace people and I can cut headcount. It's not going to be like that, at least not for a long time. What it's going to do is make the people you have better. It's kind of like when we first got Excel, right? Remember Excel, and all of a sudden, as opposed to writing numbers in a ledger and using a calculator, you've now got a spreadsheet. Well, this is where AI and ChatGPT are today, and it's where they're going. And that's why we'll be doing a lot more work on this in the very near future, right? So what is a high performance workplace? Because that's really what the infrastructure is about. How do you create a high performance workplace? Well, on a tactical level, get good at collaboration. This doesn't cost money. All it takes is a focus. You know, one of the amazing things about the pandemic was that we saw 15 years of behavior change in just 30 days. All of a sudden, everybody's into Zoom. Why? Because we had to. The challenge here is that when we moved to these collaboration tools, it was self-taught. Everybody kind of learned how to do it on their own. We just survived. But now we're beyond that. It's really critical to understand, what are your collaboration tools? What are the expectations for their use? What are the core and basic skills? Have you done any training on how to use the collaboration capabilities of your tools? And again, I think back to Excel, right? I'm running around all excited because I can sum a column. Well, somebody else is already using pivot tables. Same thing with collaboration. What are you doing to prepare your organization to be able to do that, right? And this leads to the hybrid impact. I wanted to share this with you because we ask about, has your business been affected? And we see customer sat, no, not so much. Employee productivity, accountability, a little bit. But look at communication culture and collaboration. It's been negatively impacted. Why? Because we don't have as much face-to-face interaction. But more importantly, we have not trained our people. We haven't standardized our culture on how we use our collaboration tools. You might have multiple collaboration tools, maybe too many. And this department uses that, and that department uses this, or whatever. It's so important tactically to look at your collaboration capabilities, train up your organization, set standards and expectations, and get good at collaboration. Make that an organizational excellence. Make it something you're really good at, because that is a competitive advantage and a defining attribute of a culture, right? So how do you thrive in hybrid? Well, for hybrid employees, it's about maximizing office time. It's, forcing people back to the office is one choice, but I think as opportunities continue to be available, people will choose to engage or choose not to engage. But you have to maximize that office time. It has to be more than Taco Tuesday. Give me a reason to come in. And if I come in, I should expect that my boss is there. Why would I come in if my boss is not there? There's nothing sadder than to come to an office and not have your boss there. That's the reason you go in, right? Create rules of engagement, communication standards, collaboration standards, expectations, right? How are we going to engage in this hybrid environment? And make that public and make it known, and make sure your managers, your bosses are fully engaging and motivating people to do that. Establish core hours and days, right? If you're a 3-day a week, are those 3 days Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? If you're 2, is it Tuesday, Thursday, optional Wednesday? And for different roles in your company, different people will have different expectations. There are some people that 1 day a week is enough. Other people, they might need 4 or 5. So it's very individual by company and by function, but it's important to establish those core hours and days. So whether I'm working remotely or in the office or in some other scenario, that I know between the hours of 9 and 3, more or less, that I can reasonably expect that people will be available for meetings, for conversations, and for other interactions. These are some of the themes we're learning about thriving in hybrid, and we'll be doing more work on that. Practical. Now, this is where we get into things that we need to do maybe a little bit, that require a little bit of investment, but become really critical, not just for the high performance workplace, but the retention of employees, right? They launched a study last spring in the UK. And after 6 months, 87% of the companies that went down the 4-day work week stayed with it, whether that's 4 10-hour days, or maybe it's 4 32-hour days, 32-hour weeks, whatever that is. But is that the wave of the future for the essential employee? And so what can you do to create a high performance workplace for essential employees? Well, one is upgrade the facilities. When's the last time you put a coat of paint on the walls, right? What have you done about comfort, safety, HVAC? What can you do to make that that facility more inviting, more conducive to work. It might be as simple as putting thicker pads that people stand on while they're on an assembly line. Upgrade the tools. Make sure you're using state-of-the-art equipment, technology. One of the interesting things that we learned, especially as we talk about millennials and Zs, is they want to work with the most latest tools. Nobody wants to be working on a forms-based 2001 SQL server kind of thing. They want to be on Workday. They want to be on Salesforce. They want to be building their skills in those leading business applications while doing their job. So what are you doing to upgrade your tools? And then finally, flexibility. Again, for the essential workers that have to be on site, what can you do around non-traditional hours or flex time or other things to give them a greater degree of flexibility? These are all important components when you talk about the infrastructure you need to execute, but they also connect to retention, and they also connect to your ability to attract and acquire more workers, right? And then from a strategic standpoint, concept is application optimization. Before you go buy new technology, new business apps, or do the new upgrade business apps, look at what you have today and see how you can optimize that use. I'm willing to bet, especially if you're on Salesforce or Workday, again, these are more common, and some of the other applications, you're using a fraction of the capabilities, like me summing columns in Excel versus using a pivot table. Look at those applications and make sure you're getting the most out of them, and that people have the skills and the capabilities and the willingness to use them to get the most out of them before you invest in something new. And that's infrastructure for execution. And then our last theme is opportunity in the aftermath. Where is it that we can find opportunity in the aftermath, right? We are in the aftermath economy. Again, we see the inflation's coming down, but maybe not fast enough, and certainly won't fall to where it was. We know that interest rates are still rising, although rising slower. They're continuing to rise, which makes access to capital more difficult and more expensive. And as we mentioned, your customers are in the aftermath as well. How are you helping them? And so when we talked about opportunity in the aftermath, we asked this question: which of the following will contribute to your projected sales revenue in the next 12 months? So as you look in, and we're into 23, obviously now, where is it you're going to get your sales revenue from? Very interesting question. Great response. Price increases, right? As we chase inflation, or inflation chases us, we've had to increase prices. Why? Because our prices have been increased for the materials and the people and every other aspect of the business. So price increase, customer growth, those two are right together. And then new market expansion, productivity, et cetera. But we wanted to peel this back a little bit as we talk about opportunity in the aftermath and what that would mean. Let's start with customers, right? As we said, your customers are in the aftermath as well. They're struggling with their cash flow. They're struggling with their customers. They're struggling to retain and add people. So how do you focus on your customers? How do you partner up with them? How do you become even closer to them in this most challenging environment? Because we've seen these changes in buying behavior. In Q3 of 2021, we looked at marketing and how marketing responded to customer buying behavior. Found 70% of CEOs said buying behavior had changed as a result of the pandemic. Well, again, when everything was shut down in 2020 and then through parts of 2021, customers changed from not buying to how they buy and what that meant. For salespeople, going on face-to-face calls was no longer possible. And when it became possible, you had to make sure someone was in the office. So that radically changed. And then in Q3 of 2022, we asked again, and we found that 43% said buying behaviors had changed as a result of inflation. And again, even though inflation has come down, it was raging a year ago this time and accelerating. So buying behavior has changed. Consequently, what have you done to adapt to those buying changes? It's all about aligning how customers want to buy with how you want to sell. Remember, it's not how you sell to them, it's how they want to buy. So it's this alignment of the buying process and sales and marketing. And one of the shifts we've seen is that buyers are going even further on their own in terms of the information they can acquire. This has been a trend going on for a long time, but it really accelerated, like everything during the pandemic, as buyers didn't want to meet face-to-face, wanted to be able to do more work on their own. And it changed this relationship between sales and marketing. Consequently, what have you done to address this? Well, to help you with this, we produced a report called Building a World-Class Sales System. I began my career in sales. I was a sales analyst before I became a business analyst at Gartner and at another company. and really looked at creating a framework for CEOs to think about their sales organization, not to lead it, not to manage it, not to be accountable for the growth the way a sales leader would be, but as a CEO, as your business grows and evolves, how you sell and how you market needs to change as well. And we put this together into a program to give you a framework to think about building your world-class sales system, how you connect to customers. And this concept of aligning buying process with sales and marketing process is essential to that success. Next is competitors. As we said, your customers in the aftermath, but so are your competitors. We're all dealing with this very unique set of circumstances we've never had to deal with before. But maybe this is the time. Maybe your competitors are struggling more than you. Maybe they're losing more people. Maybe they don't have access to capital. They're not managing cash flow. Maybe they've raised prices too much or cut back service too much. Maybe this is the opportunity to go after those accounts you've always wanted to get into, those companies, those decision makers that would always put you off because they had a relationship. Well, maybe that relationship has been challenged, and this is an opportunity for you to go after those accounts. May also be a time, especially if your competitors are struggling, maybe it's a good time to go after their talent, if for no other reason, to put pressure on them. And maybe it's time to think about acquiring their business. If you, like most Vistage leaders have done, through the lessons of pandemic, you've got cash flow, you have your lines of credit, you're positioned to acquire. Maybe this is the time in the aftermath to acquire that competitor, digest them and absorb them, and be prepared to capitalize on that as we move into the next growth cycle. And then pricing. Pricing is one of those areas that remains critical. Moderating inflation, decreasing tolerance, more increases. What are you doing about pricing? And how do you do it in a way that is not punitive to your customers, that your customers see as necessary? How do you really make strategic pricing decisions? You spend 44% of your time focused on operational execution, spend 44% of your time focused on acquiring customers, and you spend 1% maybe thinking about pricing, where you can throw all this energy to acquire a few more customers, or you can be strategic about how you price and gain revenue that way. You might lose a few customers along the way, but maybe those were customers you wanted to lose anyway. An unprofitable customer is not a good customer for you. Well, we lean on the expertise of our good friend, Casey Brown. Casey's a self-avowed pricing geek. We've connected with her multiple times. She and her team speak to a lot of Vistage groups. And we asked her about pricing. And she came back to us and said, be strategic in terms of the segment price increases, concentrating on the core. Next is creating messaging for now. What have you done to empower your sales team to communicate the price increase? Look, we're all tired of getting price increases. Seems like every bill that shows up on my desk or computer has got the next surcharge, the next increase. You're feeling it from the suppliers of your business, and you're trying to pass it on to customers who are tired of it. So how do you create messages? How do you arm your sales team to bring that message forward? And it's important to understand that it's not about, you don't fix problems with price, right? You have to fix it with service, improve that capability. And as I said, develop the strong leadership. Make sure that there is consistent messaging, value messaging. Again, my sales background tells me that it's never about price. Price is easy to negotiate. We know the difference between 3 and 4. It's about value, and be able to identify what the customer defines as value and represent how your capabilities align to that value. And that's true if you're selling a commodity or you're selling a complex service or capability. It's giving your sales team, those people that connect with your customers and can connect with potential customers, you're going to have go after those competitive accounts, give them the messaging, give them the skills to use pricing to your advantage so that your customers understand, accept, and gives you the opportunity to grow with pricing. And that's our 3 themes growing forward. Workforce velocity, a real focus on quit rates, a focus on how do you not just acquire people, but how do you retain them? Next is the infrastructure for execution, which is how do you create an environment, both the physical environment and the technology environment, that allows your people to execute, to create that high performance workplace, that tactically, get good at collaboration, tactically, focus on what you can do to improve and upgrade the workplace, and then strategically optimize the applications that you have today before you go and acquire more. And then opportunity in the aftermath, right? It's about attracting customers, it's about going after competitors, and it's about being positioned to price appropriately. And that sets up our theme. We looked at the decisions of hiring, investments on hiring, and then the challenges around talent, around the economic environment, and around growth. And where that leads us to, as we bring our presentation to a close, is the long view. That if we look out over the horizon, right, what do we see? Well, we're in the aftermath economy. And as ITR told us, that'll continue through 23 into 24. And as we move out of 24 into 25, we will enter the next growth cycle. And that growth cycle will run for 3, maybe 4 years as we approach 2030. And 2030 becomes a very important number. ITR, Alan and Brian Bolio, in their book, Thriving, Prosperity in the Age of Decline, spoke about a Great Depression in 2030. A Great Depression that would last 4 to 6 years, will be deep, it will be global, it will be hard. This is a scenario they've been speaking about since the mid-2010s. More recently, a gentleman named Peter Zehan, who wrote the book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, The End of More. He also references it. And it's driven by, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, easy, go to the ITR website. They've got a whole segment on their thoughts on the Great Depression. It becomes a real challenge to think about what this would mean. Even during the Great Depression of the 1930s, 75% were still employed, 25% were not. But this Great Depression is going to be driven by a lot of factors, dominantly the demographics. As boomers leave the workforce, but meaning they're no longer contributing, but rather they're taking from, that creates an issue. Aging demographics. Japan has a big issue. Europe has a big issue. We have an issue, but not as bad as some of these other places. All right. And the other is debt. We threw a lot of money globally into the market to help everyone get through the pandemic. But now we got to pay for that debt. And with rising interest rates and service on that debt, deficits will remain a problem. And these are all factors that will drive the 2030 depression. Now, there's no guarantee this will happen. There's no guarantee that between now and then another black swan event like the pandemic might come forward, right? I can remember in January, I was at the Dallas VES in January of 2020, and I had a member come up and say, Joe, I've got 2 factories in China and they're shut down. And they're saying they're not going to be open until April. And I was like, what's that? Right? And then by April, we all knew what it was. Well, there could be a black swan, but assuming no black swans, this 2030 becomes an important date. And I have a background at Gardner where we talk about probabilities. Even if this is a 0.6 probability, it's something to consider. If I told you in 2013 that in 7 years a global pandemic would strike, you might look at me sideways and you might think about it. But as it got closer, you would prepare. And that's what we're cautioning here, is that we move through the aftermath into the growth cycle. 2030 is looming on the horizon. And that becomes really important because when we ask the question, what are your plans to exit the business between now and 2028? We found 34% are looking to exit, meaning they're looking to find that window and between 25 and 28 when things are strong to make that exit. And for them, 2030 will dominantly be a personal financial planning scenario, being positioned to protect the money you make on the sale or the transition, and being positioned with lots of dry powder, to use another ITR phrase, as we come out of this sometime in the mid-2030s to really grow. For the 25% who have no plans to exit, well, it really becomes a question of what are you doing to build your business bunker? How are you going to prepare your business and protect your workers as we move through what will be a very painful and long depression? But it's this group, the 42% who plan to exit beyond 2028. That creates a really critical decision because you have to choose to either pull forward and accelerate your plans to exit or postpone them and build that business bunker. In every scenario, this impending 2030 Great Depression creates some critical decisions that have to be made. And that's why it's so important to understand this, prepare for it, and hope it doesn't happen. But should it happen, be in a position to capitalize on it. Because again, I'll lean on our good friends, ITR and Alan Bolio, who said for the prepared, there will be a fantastic wealth creation opportunity. We're positioned to be able to capitalize on that with proper preparation, fiscal discipline, and all the other things we've talked about today. But today, in the aftermath economy, what's most important is to control, manage, and take advantage of workforce velocity, right? Be sure you have an infrastructure for execution and find those opportunities for growth in the aftermath. You can find all this content at the Vistage Research Center, where you can download this report and all the content, all the reports that I referenced during the course of this presentation. And we remain Vistage Research. We are here to be hopefully to be your most trusted resources. We look at the issues, topics, and decisions you tell us are most important. I thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you found value in this. Please feel free to share this with anyone and everyone who you can provide value with it. And I thank you again for your time and attention. And I'll come back to you and see if there are any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. And I think you answered one of the questions that we had received about the depression in the 2030s and the forecast for that. And I know both of us have the opportunity to hear them at the different Vistage executive summits in different markets. And in fact, just at the last summit, there's always questions that with the amazing debt that we have, do we expect that to be pulled forward? And really they have held true to the 2030s. If anything, it's guaranteed that timeline. But as you mentioned, that period of growth is coming. Are there any other nuggets from that you can share from ITR? Go ahead.
Well, I know. I just want to comment that they've been talking about this well before the pandemic. And on their website, itreconomics.com, they've got a whole section where they have aggregated and continue to add varying concepts and ideas around how to manage through this Great Depression. Again, hopefully it doesn't happen. But if it does, you want to be prepared for it because, as Alan said, it's a fantastic wealth creation opportunity. And again, at our VES summits, our conversations with ITR, they've been pretty consistent. They adjusted their forecast for the economy as they got great concerns over the Fed's ability to, or likelihood to overreact to interest rates. So this next interest rate coming up in May, I think it is, will be interesting to see what the Fed does, especially as we saw inflation come down in the most recent data, a little bit more than most people thought. But yeah, I lean on ITR. I trust those guys. You look at their AXI ratings; they're pretty good, and that's why we partner so closely with them, because the combination of their data-driven analysis and our sentiment-driven analysis of what our CEOs think, you put those two things together, and you've got a really good perspective on what's going to happen.
Yes. So the good news is that maybe good news is the recession has pulled forward, but talk a little bit about that ramp that's going to happen from 25 to 28 and some of the recommendations around how to maximize that time and what to do in that recession, that mild recession we're expecting.
Well, I think most folks are in the mode of preparation. We talk about downshifting. A race car driver approaches a high-speed corner and they downshift. So they're using the braking system, but also the power of the engine to slow the vehicle. But it also maintains the RPM. So as you round that corner, you have the torque of the engine to accelerate. So we're seeing folks beginning to do that as you anticipate this slowdown. And the recession has been threatened for the last 12 to 18 months. We've heard about the recession hasn't happened. In fact, one of the interesting points, and we didn't go into it, but when we look at our confidence index, we saw only 9%. 9% thought the economy was getting better. And only 9% looking backward thought it had gotten better. Yet we saw growth rates in 2%, 3% in Q3 and Q4. Estimates for Q1 are around 2 to 2.1. So a lot of it is self-created. Maybe reading too many headlines of business people, business press, media, trying to sell newspapers, as the axiom goes. But I think that preparation, a lot of the lessons we learned in the recession, the pandemic, about cash flow, the importance of protecting your employees, access to capital, those all come into play. And again, it's really interesting when I talk to members, I talk to chairs, there's these three groups. There's folks that grew a bunch and are struggling to absorb it. So for them, it's more a question of how do we digest this, maintain our ability to execute, and then be positioned to grow. For others who are still growing, it's how do we add to it? And for folks that are struggling, it's how do we get back on track? And again, we went through those changes about the importance of fiscal discipline, the workforce velocity, changing workplace, and then getting close to customers.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about fiscal discipline. I know you had the opportunity to talk to Amy Daniels and Daryl Jackson, two of our amazing chairs with financial management background. And there was a question that came in about banking. And are there any thoughts on banking going forward and where to keep funds? What did you learn from your conversation with Amy and Daryl?
Well, they spoke dominantly about the stability and the security of our banking system, and that SVB and Signature and a couple of the others, people knew they were in trouble. And they were in trouble because of bad leadership, making bad decisions. So it's kind of self-inflicted damage. So first of all, they expressed confidence in the banking system and that there would be no banking collapse. And now we're what, a month and a half out, and we haven't seen much of a ripple effect from that at this point. And they also spoke about the importance of the things that we've talked about, the importance of cash flow, the importance of access to capital, the importance of managing expenses without losing people. Because again, I think, in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of cuts of headcount. And now there's this theme, this mantra almost of talent hoarding. Meaning the last thing you want to do is to have to cut people. It sends a signal, not just the people that work there, but to your customers and competitors that you're vulnerable. Consequently, through this aftermath, it's the importance of managing the numbers, but most important, maintaining your workforce, retaining your workforce. Because as we come out of this and things begin to set up for that next growth cycle, 25 to 28, you have to remember that people are the fossil fuel of the growth engine. You will be back in a hiring war. You'll be back in retention. And that's why it's so important to do the right things now about developing your workforce, developing your managers, improving the workplace environment, create a high performance workplace that people want to be a part of. And I think those are some of the big lessons that came out of that and the conversations that they expressed, the folks that they've been working with.
Right. So the banking, that was a more isolated incidents as opposed to a systemic failure in the banking system was their perspective.
Yeah, and I believe and hope they're right.
Yes, exactly. And I love your point about maintaining people. I think the recession is predicted to be fairly mild. It is not going to be the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, but rather mild. And the recommendation is to maintain that employee base. And I know that from our perspective, we've been monitoring the data about workforce expansion plans. And we have not seen the proportion of CEOs that intend to decrease their workforce. That has remained really stable. So we know that looking forward in the next 12 months, a lot of people are maybe holding tight with the people they have today or slowing their expansion, but definitely not looking at making those reductions in force that make headlines.
And a point to that is the role of technology. AI in its current state, and maybe over the next couple of years, it's not going to replace people, but it's going to make the people you have be more productive. Again, if you think back to the introduction of computers and technology in the workforce, it didn't necessarily replace people the way robotics have done in some manufacturing. It made the people you have more productive, allowing them to focus on true value-add activities and the things that humans can uniquely do about creativity and innovation, and take the drudgery of data entry away. So I think there's a real important case for the investment in technology, not at the expense of people, but at the incidence of helping people become better and more productive.
Right. Well, I know a lot of futurists talk about the reskilling of the workforce. And so the reskilling might just be what are the human skills required to manage and take advantage of the AI versus replacing them with that kind of technology.
And there's no question AI is going to become more and more prevalent, more and more common, easier and easier to use. And again, for small and mid-sized businesses who prior to this couldn't really engage because it required big company resources and big company technology. Now there's so many AI as a service almost capabilities. We heard a lot about it in marketing and other areas that you can tap into and leverage this technology to help you get closer to customers and grow your business.
Well, we'll be delving into that a little bit more. Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your insights. And thank you everyone for your time today. We will be sending a link to today's recording and the slides within 24 hours so that you may share this with your leadership team. For our Vistage chairs, you can share it with your groups. And the full report is available, as Joe said, to download now in the Vistage Research Center at vistage.com. Now, for our members, if you have not had the opportunity to watch the conversation, the Vistage exclusive with Daniel Pink, that is still available streaming on demand through May 31st. And he has great advice on motivating yourself and your teams and how to leverage regret to build a resilient culture and drive innovation. Then our next member exclusive will be held on August 25th, when organizational psychologist, speaker, and #1 New York Times bestselling author Adam Grant will offer ways for business owners and leaders to identify and harness the power of knowing what you don't know to transform how you think about and lead your company. So that's exciting. Looking forward to hearing his insights in this Vistage exclusive. You can register and hold that spot on your calendar now at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. And those are both member exclusive events. So thank you everyone for your time today. Be safe and be well.